Welcome to Wow or Women of Worth. I'm Michelle Martin. She is the woman behind the masterpiece of cultural analysis, the landmark book which New York Times named one of the most significant books of the 20th century. The Beauty Myth was published in 1990, but sitting before me is the author and activist, the renowned Naomi Wolf. Welcome, Naomi, to Singapore.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so honored to be here and to be here with you.
You've said in a recent local interview that you do not want to impose Western feminism on other cultures. Do you believe broadly in the term of Asian feminism? Do you believe that's useful?
Well, it's the first time I've ever heard that as a discrete phrase. I mean, obviously I know there is feminism in Asia, and there are probably many, many, many feminisms in Asia, just as there are everywhere. So I would need to know more about what that means to you. How do you define it, Michelle?
Sort of an umbrella term, I think, for different ideologies that are mediated by cultural or religious beliefs. And, Asia is a teeming mass of difference.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about something that I try often to communicate to Western audiences. It is the case that they're all around the globe. They're very, very exciting, what can I say, domestic or regional versions of feminism emerging, and making Western feminism a domestic and regional version of feminism. It's the West obviously has a tendency to think it is the gold standard, and it's just one of many ways of thinking about feminism. And so I actually often have to remind Western audiences that, in my experience, the feminisms that I've seen emerging in places like India and Brazil, and I'm really excited to find out, more about what's going on in Singapore. And, I hate to use the word developing because that seems like a cliche, but emerging conversations around the globe are different from Western feminism. They're different from each other. They're different, even in multi-ethnic, multicultural societies like this one. And that in some ways they're ahead of Western feminism, which is great because that's the way it should be.
Yes, I think I've read in an interview you say somewhere that some developing countries seem open to change or more open to change than some countries we typically think of as progressive.
Well, that's definitely true. I definitely feel that countries like India and Brazil, and again, of course, I'm excited to find out more about this region, but I have been having a lively conversation with women in Malaysia and Indonesia who've come onto my, social networks around issues like hijab. What is it a feminist thing to wear hijab? Is it not a feminist thing? But I definitely feel like there's a huge opportunity for Western feminism to learn a lot, to kind of do a course correction, because in some ways the feminisms I'm seeing emerging in the developing world haven't gone through this detour that I've criticized in the past that Western feminism is in right now. In other words, they're, I think, more on track, how can I put it, for what feminism should be.
Where has Western feminism gone wrong?
Let's go back to the 18th century just for a minute. Mary Wollstonecraft, who sort of started feminism, in my view, no matter where you are in the world, the Enlightenment, okay, the idea is that feminism is everyone's right to define her life as she sees fit and have, her full potential. So this is in alignment with other ideals of democracy and human development. So that's the feminism I believe in. And so that means that you can't say, well, you have to be religious or not religious to be a feminist. You have to be pro-choice or anti-choice to be a feminist. It's not a checklist. It's just a position about human dignity, right? Mm-hmm. So where Western feminism has recently gone astray from that is that post-Second World War, it became, via Simone de Beauvoir, via Betty Friedan, it got sidetracked, as I said, into kind of more of a set of lifestyle decisions like, anti-male is one way it's often characterized, or a gender war, or, working is more valuable than being a mom, or being secular is more valuable than being religious, or being a pacifist is more valuable than serving in the military, or, it's considered left of center. These are all I may be a lot of those things, right? But those are not good definitions of feminism, right? Because those are partisan and those are lifestyle choices. And so then you get into these ridiculous questions about, like, debates about women who work versus women who stay home. That's not feminism. And so when I when I travel around, for instance, the Muslim world, and I meet Muslim feminists or Indian feminists or, pretty much every feminist in the developing world I've met recently, they're much more focused on how do we empower women? And it's a much more kind of dignified and thoughtful set of questions, because it's not like only these women get to be empowered, or you're not a feminist if you wear hijab, or it's not so prescriptive, and it's also not about a gender war, which I love. It's about empowering women. It's not about are men terrible, or are women better than men, or how should women live their lives in terms of their sexual choices or their personal choices. It's much more about giving women the tools to make their own decisions. And so weirdly, it's more tolerant, not weirdly, but surprisingly, perhaps from a Western perspective. I've found that, Jordanian feminists are just more tolerant of the many different voices someone can have, or, Iranian feminists or Iraqi feminists, or, it's, and of course there are many, many Asias and many, many, feminisms in Asia. But just like I asked a question, let me hear from women about hijab, for instance,
yes.
in this part of the world. And I wasn't surprised, because I've long been trying to explain to Western women, based on my travels in the Muslim world, that I've met a million passionately feminist women who wear hijab, and you cannot make a judgment about a woman's feminism based on her clothing choices in that regard, or I would say in any regard. But I got 500 responses, and every single one of them was a feminist response, whether it was women saying, I do wear hijab, and this is why, and this is what it means to me. Amazing, moving, powerful, persuasive feminist responses that you never hear in the West, by the way. And also women, no one said, I don't wear hijab because because hijab is not a feminist thing. Some women said, I'm not ready to, or, I'm not at that place on my journey. But it was a completely fresh, new conversation from a Western perspective. And again, if you think, well, what should feminism be? It's a much more feminist conversation, because it's not telling women you have to do this or you have to do that. It's opening up space to hear women's voices.
Can the term, though, this idea of Asian feminism, obscure ideas that still compromise a woman's ability to develop fully as a human being, if we talk about equal rights in marriage, in terms of civil liberties? That we need to do it our way. Thank you for raising that, because yes, of course, which is why it's so great to have dialogue around the world. And it's great to have reinforcements wherever you are, So definitely. And the West has said stupid things about this too. I mean, in Britain, until recently, it was considered politically incorrect to say genital mutilation is bad, because it was considered insensitive to cultures that practiced it, which I think is nonsense. Again, back to the Enlightenment, some things are just not good. There is a sense of universality to the idea that women should be treated as human beings.
Exactly. And of course, one can debate what those universal rights look like, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, let's talk about universal human rights and not, mutilating people. I'm happy to make that argument. But yes, and that's why I'm excited that the world is becoming so small, because tactically, yes. If you're having a fight, wherever you are, and this is true in the West as well, where, we're all inside our own bubbles, right, domestically. Mm-hmm. And it's very helpful to say, well, in Sweden, they've solved this problem through, paying women a salary to have children, or
yes.
In Canada, they get 6 months off for this, or, in India, they're solving this problem through criminalizing rape in the following way, or however we can, or any group of feminists can be a source of empowerment to any group anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's very helpful.
More from celebrated social commentator Naomi Wolf in Wow, Women of Worth, with me, Michelle Martin, after this.
Add to your Wow Factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
Feminist Naomi Wolf became a literary sensation and placed a defining stamp on the development of the analytical lens of feminism when she produced The Beauty Myth in 1991. She was still in her 20s at the time. There are a million different ways of defining oneself as a feminist, but what I learned from my encounter with Wolf was how genuinely interested she is in understanding the state of feminism here in Singapore before being prescriptive, how it is room for the many voices of what women themselves regard as important in different regions seemed to be what she wanted to lean in and hear more of even in this particular interview. More from Naomi Wolf.
You've said in interviews that the experience of childbirth radicalized you. How
Yes.
so, and what is your experience of feminism today?
Sure. So first, I mentioned earlier when we were talking that one way Western feminism has kind of gone off the rails in some ways is it went through a phase, it's better now, but not healed, about devaluing the role of women as mothers and wives, but making a home and raising children and nurturing. And I firmly believe that, women are no better at making a home and nurturing than men are. People have this great human capacity to love and care. Exactly. But it wasn't good for feminism or for women, I think, that in the West, their role as career producers were so highlighted and valued and given status, and their important roles to them, to many women of being mothers, was devalued. So I am, of all the things I do, being a mom, I'm the proudest of. I'm glad I have 8 best-selling books. I'm glad that I get to travel the world. There's nothing I'm prouder of than, my job as a mom of 2 beautiful kids. So I guess it radicalized me just to value that part of women, like seeing how hard it was in my own life, how demanding, and how much intelligence it takes. It's like being a good parent is like 10 times harder than writing a good book. You have to be on the ball, all the time. You can't blow it, seriously. And so I guess I just, my respect for women around the world, seeing that they're doing all the things they do and raising children,
Yes.
often in very difficult circumstances. Just really, like when you have been up all night trying to pacify a cranky child. I mean, I went to Sierra Leone shortly, before my second child was born, and I saw people with no shelter. I saw families that when there was rain, they were rained on, literally. The Civil War had destroyed their homes, and you just around the world, mothers are raising children in refugee camps and without enough food and walking miles and miles for water. So that radicalized me, about just how hard that is and how unfair that there's such inequity in the world. And I guess the other thing is that, I was so privileged in so many ways. I have a very easy life compared to, many people around the world, but I had trouble balancing. And I guess it made me very aware of how the world is not constructed to support women and children. Our institutions are not constructed to support women and children. And
You also gave a voice to a part of being a mother that's rarely talked about, and that is the experience of childbirth and how dehumanizing that can be, even if you are privileged and, have the best of medical care.
That's true.
Do you think it is important to keep talking about stories of childbirth?
I do, although I'd love to know what women's experience in Singapore is, because it's such a technically developed, advanced place that I wonder
Women
if it's
are
more of the
10
Western
times
model.
more likely to die in childbirth and pregnancy-related causes in the U.S. than they are in Singapore.
Oh my gosh.
That according to the
oh my gosh.
State of the World Mothers 2014 report.
That's really shocking and embarrassing. Wow. I mean, not for you, but for us. Oh my goodness.
But I think this dehumanizing aspect that you talk about, do you see progress in that at all since you've talked about it in 2001?
So in some ways it's gotten worse. I mean, I think there was like a 30% cesarean section rate when I wrote the book in 2001, and I think it's up to 40, in some areas in the United States now. For reasons, if your viewers aren't familiar with our system, we don't have nationalized health care. There's this huge profit motive in our system, and it means that women giving birth are kind of on an industrial conveyor belt and rushed through the system. There are practices like episiotomies that are standard in, advanced situations like yours and ours, though less advanced, obviously, based on the statistics you cited, that my most recent book, which is about female sexuality, Vagina, confirms, actually can cause, it's a very serious thing to do to a woman sexually, to give her an episiotomy. And this is just, in hysterectomies and all the routine stuff that, is done to women just because their bodies are not considered, that important.
Naomi Wolf, when we come back, she's turning 52 this year. I ask her if there is no better time to be a woman. Renowned, celebrated feminist Naomi Wolf in the Wow Club with me, Michelle Martin. Stay tuned for more.
Add to your Wow Factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
Naomi Wolf was in town for the Singapore Writers' Festival, and this weekend so many people were part of a panel discussions and even part of the wonderful literary meal that was part of the offerings of the Singapore Writers' Festival. Renowned social commentator Naomi Wolf is my guest tonight in Women of Worth. She was here in Singapore from Friday to about Sunday, I believe, to be part of the Singapore Writers' Festival. She attended Yale University, was a Rhodes Scholar. Earlier we talked a little bit about her engagement with feminists outside of the West or the US. We also talked a little bit about how her visits to different parts of the world have informed her ideas of the relevance of feminism and how it's being interpreted across cultures. More from Naomi Wolf. She lets us into her personal life, find out how she feels about turning 52 this year, and more about the research that neuroscience has shed on female sexuality, research for her book, Vagina.
Did your research for that book, your research into neuroscience, surprise you about what it brought up about female sexuality?
Absolutely blew my mind, stunned me. I was astonished, yes.
And is it still difficult for you to mention the title of that book in public discourse?
No, I've gotten ridiculously used to it. I say it, day in and day out without blushing. It was definitely, it always brought up a blush when the book first came out. But I also know that, I'm trying to be sensitive to, any sort of guidelines on discussion. Yeah. But people who are interested in the book can look at it themselves. And the bottom line is that there's a lot of new news about female sexuality and neuroscience that we didn't know and is not well known. And the reason I bring this up is that a lot of studies, a lot of things I wrote about in misconceptions didn't make sense completely till I wrote Vagina and researched the neuroscience there, because there's a very high drop in women's marital satisfaction after they give birth. And I'm sure that this is, I haven't seen the data for Singapore specifically, but this is quite common around the world. And there's a lot of speculation. Is it stress? Is it sleep deprivation? Is it, just having a new baby in the middle of everything? But, one big culprit is episiotomies, because there's a sexual center of neural termini in the perineum that gets cut with an episiotomy. And so women just literally don't feel as much afterwards, sometimes as they do before. And it turns out that sexual pleasure is really important for women's well-being generally, which you can do with that as you will, in the editing room.
No, I think it's important that people understand these ideas are revolutionizing the way we see female desire,
Yeah,
I think it's wonderful.
Can I chime in there before you go on to the next thing?
Sure.
We're talking about the differences in feminism in the developing world and the West, and one wonderful thing about conversations I've had in the developing world is that women in the developing world, again, making a huge generalization, are much readier to dignify discussion about sexuality as important to human rights. And in the West, we've kind of forgotten how important that is to human rights. So my book, Vagina, was very controversial in North America and in Western Europe, not controversial in India and Brazil and other in the Muslim world, not controversial in the sense that people knew it was important to, talk about the politics of rape or talk about the politics of female sexual pleasure and the suppression of female sexual pleasure. Yeah. It was not seen as trivial or outre or like very central. Yeah.
It's a very interesting contrast, yeah. The World Economic Forum report says that women are rapidly closing the gender gap with men in areas like health and education, but it will take till 2095 when inequality at work can be erased. In Singapore, the clearest representation of the lack of female participation in at least corporate decision-making is in the corporate boardrooms, where the number of women on corporate boards of SG-listed companies is 8.3%. In Indonesia, it's about 11%, and in Norway, it's about 40%. So we're way down. So what do you think needs to happen for more women to make it to corporate boardrooms? Women are often blamed for dropping out of the whole economic system.
Right. I mean, this is a very deep question. And obviously, on a basic level, countries that have well thought out work-family balance policies do better, like the Scandinavian countries where you can actually, take it. Actually, Holland is not Scandinavian, but I was impressed with this policy. You can take a day off a week in Holland. So if you're a two-parent family, you can take Monday, your partner can take Friday. There's, state-funded childcare all week. And they don't have the angst about, work family that North American women do have, for instance. So that's very fundamental, but it's not going to solve that problem of the glass ceiling that you're describing. It'll help. Women drop off at mid-career. I've just been looking at statistics about this because they see nothing ahead that looks attractive. This is common. Whether it's that the definition of what the life looks like up there is not attractive, working 70 hours a week and having no personal life, or that they feel like it's a not welcoming environment for their voice and talents. So it's not as simple as, they just opt out or they want to go home and do yoga. It's not as simple as that. So there are many things companies can do that can help this. One of them, for instance, and again, we just did some analysis about this at the Athena Center, which I'm affiliated with at Barnard, making telecommuting easier. Technologies of telecommuting for men and women apparently does a lot to, address that drop-off. They call it a leaky pipeline. Yes. Things like making sure women are mentored, within a corporation, networking options that are formalized for women so that they have a group of women who can help advance them and promote them the way men instinctively or whatever traditionally create a group of men to advance and promote them. All of these things are not obvious, but they help a lot. And I think women too, I just met Sheryl Sandberg a couple of weeks ago, and I do agree that women have to not wait, and that they have to do things more proactively. And, we did this at Woodhull. We taught women how to do this, like creating affiliations and networks where they kind of make a deal to advance and promote each other and circulate power among themselves. I hang out with powerful white men a lot, and that's all they do all day long is they have a little circle of their buddies and they just circulate power, hire each other, promote each other. And it's just understood that they'll do that for each other. I
was just speaking to someone from Norway who said there is an emerging girls' network the way there is a boys' network.
Good. That'll scare them. Yeah, you can't wait is the answer. We can't wait. One last thing I want to say is important. In America, where there have been real leaps ahead, it's been because of lawsuits and a good civil structure where women who see discrimination or have experienced discrimination can bring a gigantic multi-million-dollar lawsuit. That really does change things.
So strong civil liberties at the base of this.
Add to your wow factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
More from my guest Naomi Wolf after this. Welcome to WOW, or Women of Worth. I'm Michelle Martin. Today, my conversation with renowned feminist Naomi Wolf. She was involved in Bill Clinton's 1996 re-election bid and was hired as a consultant to target female voters during Al Gore's bid for presidency in the 2000 election. Earlier, we were talking about what it would take to close the gender gap with inequality at work from a global perspective. Hear more from Naomi Wolf.
You are now 52.
51.
51,
almost 52.
Excuse me.
That's right. Next month.
No better time to be a woman?
There is no better time to be a woman. Do you mean in my personal life or in the world?
In your life.
Definitely no better time to be a woman. Yeah. I mean, I'm so lucky. I mean, it's funny. This culture doesn't, or all of our, global culture doesn't, it keeps certain secrets. And there's like this mythology that women kind of lose more and more as they get older. And you really never get to hear from, a lot of women my age and older are having so much fun. And, it's like, I'm not saying you can't generalize everywhere, but there is this emerging class or group internationally of women who are in their, 40s and 50s, and, that'll probably continue into our 60s and 70s as we go on and on, who have, their kids are big enough, so that they're not sort of on child duty around the clock, right? They're very autonomous. They're creating their own lives, whether they're, married or with partners or choosing partners or dating or whatever. They're directing their own households, in whatever way, or partnering with their own household. They have money. They have choice and autonomy and health. And it's amazing, and there's this weird timelessness, to, like, we're so privileged. Our grandmothers were kind of, their teeth were falling out at this point, and they were one foot in the grave. At least my great grandmother, I would say. Whereas we get to have like 30 or 40 years, knock wood, of health and fitness and vibrancy and so on, if we're fortunate. So it's awesome. That's the secret of that they don't let us tell younger women, like, don't worry, it just gets so much more fun,
That is wonderful to hear. Absolutely wonderful. Your book, The Beauty Myth, was published in 1990. Has social media intensified the message behind it that, women are expected to be held up to a certain standard of beauty?
It's a great question, Michelle. I mean, I definitely think social media has, intensified and dimensionalized in a way how often you need to worry about it. Like, everybody's a public figure now, and, for better and worse. At the same time, I also think that you could flip that around and say that the ideals of beauty have democratized and diversified as a result as well.
Because people are taking selfies of themselves first thing in the morning.
And also just the range of people you see around.
Mirror it back to you is beautiful.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a message for women and men here in Singapore?
Well, I have only just arrived, so I'm dying to learn more about what women are doing, and what they want in Singapore. I mean, I try to make it a practice always to listen first. But having said that, I think I'm going to generalize. Okay, I'm going to abstract. We're all, like, we're talking about women's issues right now, right? But really the big fight, the big issue, women's issues are part of it, and it's a global fight. And what's happening is that all over the world, the fight is turning into a small group of, multinational corporate and power elites who are trying to suppress democracy and dissent and freedom around the world in very similar ways around the world. And this other, to me, very exciting constituency, which is increasingly people all over the world of all backgrounds, all races, all ethnicities, who, because of the internet, are finding out that they actually like each other and can live in peace and want to protect the planet and share resources. And so these two are at war, right? And the former is trying to suppress the latter. And it's really a race against time, like who will create a sustainable set of institutions first, without being squelched by the other group. So I guess Singapore, I see Singapore as right there with Canada and Australia and North America and Western Europe and all the places where this is the fight. And I hope our side wins.
Add to your wow factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
My thanks to Naomi Wolf. What a great, great listener she was, and so generous with her time and her ideas and willingness to be so open in that particular interview. And also thanks to the good people at the Singapore Writers Festival for access to Naomi Wolf. You're listening to Women of Worth, and if you'd like to hear more of the ideas that she was talking about, that last bit of that interview, I think the book to pick up by Naomi Wolf is The End end of America. And one of my favorite quotes from her book, The Beauty Myth, in which she dissects the ideals that women feel that they have to hold themselves up to in terms of global or gold standards of beauty. One of my favorite quotes from that book is, "She wins who calls herself beautiful and challenges the world to change to truly see her." Women of Worth with me, Michelle Martin. Tune in next week for more great ideas from minds, both male and female.